Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome back from the break for our second installment of the 3 Roundtable Super Spectacular. This is a day-long event where we are going to celebrate all things superpowered through the lens of games, comics, film, and media of all sorts. I'm Liz Brown. I am the treasurer of the Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable of ALA. This event is being held live. However, if you need to leave or would like to watch it again, a Twitch video on demand will be accessible right after we end. Links for all the places you can find us and our partner roundtables will be posted in the chat, as well as a large list of resources that you can check out. For this section, GNCRT, in partnership with Fanbase Press, will present a dramatic reading of Quince by creators Sebastian Kadlecik and Steinkellner. Quince is the story of Lupe, who, on the cusp of her quinceañera, discovers that she has superpowers, but that they come with a catch. A Q&A with the creators will follow the presentation. Be sure to stick around because after the reading, we'll be able to take your questions from the Twitch chat and make sure they get answered. Please join me in welcoming Sebastian and Kit.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
All right, Sebastian, we just launched into it.
Let's do it.
I'm reading Lupe. You're reading everybody else?
Yes.
All right, cool.
Quince.
At my high school nutrition break is from 9:50 to 10:05, and this is what it normally looks like. This is what it was like the day before my quinceañera.
Excited for your quince, girl. Mexican bar mitzvah for the win.
People never pay attention to me, and I knew it was just because I was throwing all these people in my freshman class a DJ'd party with free food. And I knew my life was probably going to go back to normal after Saturday night. But I had this tingly, sparkly, weird feeling at the bottom of my stomach that things weren't going to go back to normal after my quince, because my normal life was so boring, it hurt. I am a total nerd, and my favorite thing to do is watch fangirl shows on Netflix, even though the superheroes are always white people. Hang in there, Buffy. Stop being evil, Angel.
Dinner, mija.
Coming, Mommy. My family is definitely the best, but they are also completely the worst, probably just like your family. My mom, who loves me so much, but shows it by nagging me all the time. My dad, so nice, but like in the most embarrassing way possible. My big brother Carlos, who is super handsome and smart and funny and uses all his powers for evil, like pranks. My little sister Sophia, who is obsessed with me, which is awesome, but sometimes it's just like, stop. My abuela Emma is different. She is always the best, and she is never the worst.
How many boys fell in love with you today, mija?
All of them, abuela, just like they do every day.
Sounds like someone's ready to try her quince dress on.
What? You're finished? We have to be excused, Mama. Please, please, please.
But food is important. She'll eat 1,000,000 more dinners. She only gets one quince dress. I guess they're gone. Helpful.
I'm so excited. I can't even look, but I must. This is the best dress ever. I feel like the President of the United States, plus the Queen of England, plus like God.
I'm glad you like it, querida.
I'm crying kind of because I love my dress, but mostly because I love you.
You must remember, Lupita, with a great quince dress comes great responsibility.
Okay, Uncle Ben.
I'm serious, mija. My quince changed my life. Yours very well may too.
Like I'll become a mature and responsible adult and maybe finally have enough boobs to actually merit a bra.
Something like that.
This is what I wanted my quinceañera to be like. This is what it was actually like. Can freaking out kill you? Maybe? Probably? Yes, I'm dead. I felt like I was going to vomit and have diarrhea and my period all at the same time, which sounds so gross, but it was also so true.
Ready?
Hell no. Totally. I was more freaked out than I had ever been in my life. And that weird, sparkly, tingly feeling was back. And it wasn't staying at the bottom of my stomach anymore. What the what?
Kaboom!
I wish I had found out I had superpowers in a cool way, like saving a bus full of all the hot guys from my school from careening off a cliff. But no, I had to go explode a bathroom. I can't even with my life, you guys.
The end.
The end.
To be continued.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say let's dot.
Stop the share, Russell.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was a great rendition of your comic. I love such a ending to close on, or to be continued. I have a couple prepared questions. Also, I want to invite chat if they have any for our creators. Please pop them in the chat, and we will make sure to get them answered on live. Let's get started. So there are multiple pop culture references throughout Quince. Do you guys have any favorite superheroes?
Sebastian,
Yes. Sure. Yes, definitely. So my favorite superheroes are the same superheroes that have been my favorite since probably third or fourth grade. Superman, the Hulk, and Spider-Man. I've always loved those characters, continue to speak to me, and of all the stuff that I've collected comic book wise over the years, those are the three main ones. So those are my favorites.
I wanted you to kick us off with like a real answer before I like went off the map a little bit. Yeah, I was thinking about I'm an Incredibles gal. I really, and I'm kind of tipping the next question a little bit, but I really love genre as metaphor. I have the softest space in my heart for it, and I've always loved the Incredibles. But I became a mom a couple years ago, and I just relate to Elastigirl on like a dark, deep level now. You stretch and you stretch and you stretch, and God willing, you don't snap.
Oh man, very relatable. um, Sebastian, could you maybe go a little deeper into your answer and like what is it about those three characters that has really held your attention over all this time? Something we were talking about in our previous panel is how superheroes have kind of hit people at like as a formative influence young and like stuck with them, and we've been trying to like dig into why they stick around so long.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's probably so. What I love about comics too, and these characters that continue, is everybody gets to kind of have their version of it. So there's, kind of a lot. Whenever they show up on like the cinematic universe, people are like, "That's not my Hulk," or "That's not my whatever," and it's like there have been a ton of versions of the Hulk that is not the definitive version. If you have a version in your own art that is yours, but I think specifically for Superman, that was the first superhero I was ever introduced to. I remember as a kid, um, I had been given this book that was Superman from the 30s to the 70s, I believe, and I would just flip through it. I had a huge Fortress of Solitude comic as well. I remember, my mom showing me the Christopher Reeve Superman when I was very young, and she still is like, "You really thought you were Superman? Like you really believed you were Superman when you were a kid?" And it was just a character that really hit me, like just the way that he's able to transform. I think with a lot of these characters, also the three characters that I chose, I mean, everyone has an alternate identity. But these three characters specifically, Superman, particularly in the Christopher Reeve Superman, like really seems like a very timid person. And then he's actually able to do all this amazing stuff. So he's sort of underestimated. He also has an incredible amount of power and he chooses to use it for good. And that I think is so, I responded to it as a kid and I still respond to it now also as a father, as Kit was saying, like some of these things hit me a little bit differently now where I'm like, yes, choose good, choose using your power for positive things. The Hulk was definitely became my thing when I was in a more sort of, third, fourth grade. I was really getting into comics. Same thing with Spider-Man. And it's, again, these guys that are kind of underestimated. I think we all want to feel like we have a lot more potential than anyone can see. And if only they saw the real us, like like inside me is something really spectacular, amazing, incredible. And I think those were things that I really grabbed onto as well. And with Spider-Man, and this is something that we wanted to capture with Quince. Like with Spider-Man, I really liked the sort of, especially in the really early comics, and I would go to the library actually to get old Spider-Man comics and old Fantastic Four, all the early stuff. And I remember just flipping through Spider-Man and just really loving that, like he was a high school kid that was just dealing with life, and that was really appealing to me, that he would be like, oh, I have a cold but I need to go fight the Green Goblin, or oh, I have a test tomorrow, or Aunt May needs to pay the rent, or any of those things that are everyday things. But yet he was also a superhero. He also had this incredible ability and responsibility, and got to put on a cool suit and go after some colorful characters. And yeah, with the Hulk, I really enjoy the the gravity that he has as Banner, but then also I think we all kind of feel this thing inside of us that we maybe don't want to feed, but that comes out, and then we feel good when it comes. So I think it's a really I love the Hulk. I could talk for an hour about the Hulk, but it still is one of my favorite. He still is one of my favorite characters, and I've loved so many different incarnations of him. I've loved seeing him in different ways in the cinematic universe, but certainly in the comic books, like that really, I think the power and the rage and stuff, and I think the angst maybe when I was coming of age, I really tapped into that and loved drawing all those characters as well. So I had a very short answer, and that's probably a long-winded answer, but you opened the door for
No, we are here to nerd out about our favorite things. That is the point of this. Thank you. So Kit, you did allude to my next question a little bit. So how do you like using, and how do you like using superpowers as a creative device in your respective writing?
Yeah, I think anytime you can, again, I said genre as metaphor. It's not exclusively what I do, but I always relish the opportunity to use genre as metaphor. And every time you can take um, a feeling or a situation that is very grounded and true to life, let's say adolescence, and find um, a genre space that supports how huge it all feels. I think it's a recipe for real magic. I remember, again, we shout out Buffy in the first issue of the comic, partly because it in some ways it was sort of like the inspiration from this comes from like a Buffy Spider-Man place of really letting genre support the experience of adolescence. And I remember so clearly hearing about Joss Whedon's pitch for Buffy. The pitch is, when he goes to, I think what at the time was the WB, and says what the show was going to be. And two sentences from this pitch were, high school is a horror movie, and if you survive high school, you're a superhero. And I think both those things are so not only woven into the DNA of that show, but I think is what makes that show feel so seminal. So, like people who were teens in the 90s gravitate towards it. I think people that are teens now, and I calling out the elephant in the room, I know Joss Whedon publicly as a much more complicated figure now than he was in the 90s. But I think the art is obviously resonated back then and still resonates now. And that's just really, yeah, anytime you can take something deeply human and find a way to just really a deeply human and specific experience, and let genre just really support it. I mean, I think Everything Everywhere All at Once, the film that came out this past year, the way it dealt with the immigrant experience and being a family through the lens of multiple realities and dimensions. I mean, you can just go on and on, but I just really, yeah, I think it's a powerful device when used wisely, and I'm really grateful that we got to use it here.
I can see a lot of the Buffy fandom resonating in the chat, as well as Xena, Warrior Princess. Did you have anything you wanted to add, Sebastian?
Yeah, well, I loved Xena and Buffy certainly. So that, but just to what Kit was saying, like I think also the only thing I would add, I think she said it absolutely beautifully. I agree with all of that. I think that particularly in coming of age, like everything feels huge, everything feels gigantic. Our lives are changing, and I think particularly with superpowers, as you're coming of age, your body is changing. It's a way through metaphor of really showing like the changes that are happening and how huge all that stuff feels. And I really feel that like a lot of times when people grow up, they are very dismissive of teenagers or of the experiences that even they had as teenagers or high schoolers, and are like, oh, I was so dramatic, or oh, everything's life or death and whatever. And I feel like, yeah, I mean, do you not remember? It did feel like life or death. Like it was literally these huge emotions that we were feeling that were oftentimes overwhelming, that we didn't have the life experience to really, we'd never been to the other side of that emotion. So it did feel like everything was gigantic. And I think genre, and specifically superheroes and superpowers, I think is a really great way of tapping into that, and how those things feel really huge. And I like Kit said, I'm so glad that we were able to do that with this comic.
I think that segues really nicely into one of the questions we've received in chat. How do you think comics like Quince fit into to the newer media of superhero stories? Because we are seeing, I think, a much more diverse approach to superheroes coming out recently.
Yeah, Kit, do you mind if I jump in first?
Yeah, you should. You should. I was like,
Um,
Sasha, also, when did maybe Barbara can time too? When did we write the first issue? When did the first issue come out? Because because I guess I want you to jump in, but I'm also thinking about what we were doing then versus what it is now, because a bit of time has elapsed. Anyway, but take it away, please.
Absolutely. So I'll answer that question in this in this larger answer as well. So the first issue digitally came out in 2017, and the idea goes back to all the way like 2013, 2014, and it was inspired by. And so I really wanted to do a project that celebrated my heritage, my culture, that really showed everything in a positive light. My wife and I had been going to these quinceañeras for the family around that same time, and I just felt like, wow, they are experiencing such huge emotions, and it's such a specifically cultural event. This is perfect. It was all kind of coming together. But the most important part of that was a couple weeks later when I saw my own nieces running around the living room dressed as superheroes, and yes, this was back in 2014, whatever, and there are these incredible young Latinas running around the living room. And that was when it really, for me, hit of like how limited representation is in the larger, I mean, people can be like, oh well, there is this one character from Marvel, from Volpe, and that's great. And I think celebrate everything that came before. But I'm talking about what most people are consuming. I love comics, so I love digging into that stuff. But most people are either seeing the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Warner Bros. Or whatever, or reading Spider-Man or reading whatever. And so it to me was just like, wow, there's really a lack of representation. And that was the moment when it went from this would be a cool story to feeling compelled to actually put it out into the world and feeling like it was something that was important. And so I think it is important, as Kit said, to kind of look at it also in that time frame, because things have gotten better step by step, incrementally things are starting to get better. And so now it feels like, oh, it's part of this wave of like, diversity and inclusion, which is great, awesome. But it definitely came from a place of like wanting to get there, wanting to push that forward. And so I think that answered every aspect of those questions. But I'm very excited. I'm very excited that things are changing. I'm very excited that there are, like Blue Beetle coming out. Like I'm excited that in the book realm, there's so many amazing, particularly in, independent books and stuff that are coming out, and even in larger mainstream. So there's just a lot of really amazing stuff that's coming out in the graphic novel form and any sort of sequential art form. And that's so exciting and so wonderful. And it's great to see that there are these changes. I mean, I remember my nieces were dressed as like Supergirl and Batgirl, and at the time, Supergirl was only known as like a white blonde girl, and Batgirl, a white redheaded girl, and that now we're seeing there's a new Supergirl. There's a lot of different iterations of these characters that are becoming more mainstream, which I think is really, to me, is really cool. I really think that's awesome, and it's great to be in that listener question. Like, it's great to be included in that group. Was that what you were getting at too, Kit? Was just like where our minds are at in earlier?
Again, it's been because it was the first digital issue was published in 2017, but we were working on this in like the 2015 2016 space. So it's just it's wild to say that out loud, because it's like, oh, it's coming up on a decade, right? Of this being conceived. And it's been a big decade so I thought it just made sense to talk about that moment in time and now, and kind of bridge the divide. So yeah.
Yeah, there are 2 points that what you were talking about really drew out for me, Sebastian. The one is like the need for superhero stories outside of the big two, DC, Marvel, because I think, it's what we've sort of alluded to earlier is like how universal the superhero story is, and how it needs to be sort of taken away from just brand names, perhaps. And that's one of the things I really like, that I like how Quince sort of does that by, approaching a different platform and taking a different approach that isn't tied to a market, like a franchise, basically. And yes, I agree. I completely agree. We're really enjoying seeing the diversity of backgrounds that are now being represented in the different characters that do exist. Because I think it sort of helps to facilitate people having that personal connection with the superhero stories that we referenced earlier, and that's like foundational to leading them to reading comics or otherwise. So thank you. I really appreciate you bringing out those points. So Quince's started as a webcomic on Comixology and then transitioned into print. There has been a growing interest among comics librarians and librarians in general about collecting digitally and sort of having access to things that are published in these digital formats. Could you tell us a little bit about what that process was like, starting as a webcomic and then transitioning into print? And was anything gained or lost in that process?
Yeah, so I think that as Kit said, we were working on this back in like 2015. Is I think when I first reached out, and we all started putting in the work. And at that point, I wasn't sure. I hoped Fanbase Press would publish it. That was my hope, but I didn't know yet. It was Kid, Emma, and I were still laying the groundwork. And so my promise, though, to Kid and Emma was that it would get out into the world. That it wasn't going to just be something that we were all doing and spending time on that was not going to see the light of day. And at that time, I saw my nieces and nephew on iPads all the time. I wasn't sure if I was going to. I never planned on trying approaching the big two or anything, but I did think there was a lot of small press publishers that maybe I could reach out to if Fanbase Press said no. And then I also was like, well, maybe I will self-publish it. And with all those things in mind, I had done a previous series where we printed out floppies for every issue, and there's not a good margin on that. And if I was going to be kind of funding it, I knew that digital was a really accessible way, and I knew that it could reach a much broader audience through digital. So that was always kind of the idea, was that we would have a digital situation going on. And then when I was talking to Fanbase, there was a sort of pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of a trade paperback, and then eventually a hardcover. And so while we were working on it, both things were always in our minds. And it wasn't a traditional webcomic of like 3 panels a week or whatever. It was always issues. It was always digital issues that were coming out each month. And so I think from the beginning, all of us really anticipated it being both digital and that there would be physical copies at the end of the rainbow. So we had both things in mind. So in terms of like what changed or what was gained or what was lost, both things were always in consideration. So I don't personally feel like I feel like it's kind of preference of what you like. But I do think what's great about digital is that you are, even if you're not one of the big two, you're able to reach a lot of people. And that was kind of the goal, because it is a more, a smaller press, and we're not the big two, and these stories are important. And it felt like the more that we can get that story out there, the better. I just had all these ideas of people, all over reading the story and connecting with it. And so yeah, we always had those things in mind. I think digital is wonderful. We've certainly, since that time, really, I was only thinking of Comixology, and we also talked about maybe it being available digitally on the website or whatever. But we at that, but now there's all these other platforms of Hoopla and et cetera, where there's a lot more ways to access it. We've always been excited about the bilingual nature of it. Like we released it in English and in Spanish through Comixology on the same day. And then now that we have the hardcover, we have one side is English and you flip it over and it's in Spanish. So that was always really important. It was really just about making it as accessible as possible. And I'm thankful that digital allows that to happen. I also, at that time, and since, have had many friends, particularly we live in LA, and I had a lot of friends who were getting rid of physical comic book collections because they needed space, and maybe they were also becoming parents, and so they're like, I'll just keep everything on my on my digital collection instead. So I think there's a lot of benefits from it.
Was there anything you wanted to add, Kit?
The only thing I'd add is that it was always we can never mind. What's going on? We're going into a screen. I see Etsy. I see GarageBand. Anyway, I'll keep talking. I did my best to write the issues like chapters of a novel, or actually more to the point, episodes of a television show, so that each issue stood alone. But I think just like you assume with a television show that most people are going to binge it on the B side versus watch it week to week, I think Sebastian and I and Fanbase and Emma just assumed the vast majority of our audience would read it in one go at the tail end. So for the people that were reading it month to month, the hope was that each issue felt like a complete story, satisfying, like an episode of television, beginning, middle, end. But I think I always assumed the vast majority of people would read digitally and would read it in one go, issues 1 through 15 as a graphic novel.
So that alludes to another question I have. You both have careers in media outside of comics, into TV and film. Could you tell us a little bit more about where the intersections of this comic and film media are, in terms of your careers and your writing experience?
Yeah. Look, I think writing comics has made me a better film and television writer, and I think vice versa for sure. I I think it's even easier for me in the past to in a feature or television script just be like incredibly wordy and just like write. And I come from playwriting, so like we can be monologists. But I monologue, I guess, but it, if you are too wordy in comics, you don't leave room for the image. You know, and it's. I think it's again a really interesting object lesson where you actually, or I actually saw, um, like the, the space I was taking up with too much text being like a real hindrance to the art form, and really and a thing that you maybe don't see for months or years when you're writing a feature or television script, but you see pretty immediately when a graphic novel is or a comics page is laid out. So I think it's just really taught me to be briefer, and then vice versa. Just really like the power of like a splash page, the power of like one single visual image in a graphic novel or a comic. I think is really for me inspiring. Going back to film and TV, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we aren't working with like a Marvel or a DC budget in whatever film or TV thing I'm working with, but what is that striking, powerful image? What's that one shot that just like punches you in the face in the best way? You know, so I think those are two examples of for me how I feel like there's definitely a continuous loop, and I really like. I don't work in like a ton of different mediums, but when I do work in another medium as a writer, I always like the lessons it teaches me that I can bring back to whatever medium I'm going back to.
Yeah, I when I was a kid, again going back, I guess to like third and fourth grade, the first thing I ever wanted to be was a comic book creator, and so I would spend all my time drawing and creating these comics, and my mom would bring home scratch paper and I'd staple it together and just draw my own comics, morning, noon, and night. And I was like, this is what my life is going to be. And then in junior high, I found a video camera, and I was like, oh my god, this is what my life is going to be. And I feel like the transition is pretty uh, it's pretty natural because they're both visual mediums, right? And then when I was doing the the films that I was making in junior high and high school, I would do storyboards first, and so I really felt like I was bringing comic books to life, just through that. So I think they're tied, in the as visual mediums. I love how they can play together. Everything that Kit said, I need to write down because that was really awesome. But what you said about like the striking images and stuff, I think it's really interesting. It's been very interesting to see kind of what works in a comic book and what works in a film or a television show, or what Kit pointed out, leaving room for the images and stuff. And I think also the way movement and motion and stuff, like with a comic book, everything is a static image, so it's more difficult to express maybe things freezing or the passage of time or whatever. And then in film and television, they ask a lot more logic questions. Like in comics, there's a bit more broad strokes of like, you get it. And then in film and television, no, really though, what were they doing between this time and this time? And I gotta answer that question. So that I think is all just really. I think they're definitely connected, but it's cool to see. They're not the same. It's cool to see what works in one and what works in the other, and sometimes we can try and force a comic to be something else, or try and and a comic is a comic, and it kind of has its own ways that it gets to really be its best form. But yeah, that's my take on it. But I need to write down what Kit said because that was really awesome.
Don't worry, we're recording. You can always
Oh, good. Yeah.
rewind.
I'll watch the Twitch stream.
We're friends. I will always get on the phone and talk your ear off about like craft. Don't worry
Well,
about
that's great because we have a question about craft in the chat. Can you tell us more about the lore of your world and how you came to decide what aspects you decided to explore in your world building. Because that's also relates to another question I had. Because I really like the situation of like the mundanity of ridiculously timed school lunches with something as crazy as exploding a bathroom with superpowers. So, could you talk a little bit more about world building?
Yes. So it's interesting. The original sort of image that I had in my head of Lupe was her in her quince dress, floating and glowing, and that really reminded me of La Virgen de Guadalupe, the Virgin of Guadalupe, where and so there are certain things that Kit and I discussed about that, and then also so there's actually little hints along the way of sort of allusions to that, just in terms of world building, like centering it on something, grounding it in something. We also I look the mundanity and next to the like big things. I feel like that's coming of age. I feel like that's high school. Certainly, it's something that I love. So I've known Kit as a playwright first. We were doing all this experimental theater together. I always was a huge fan of hers as a person and as a writer. And she had also done a webcomic with her sister Emma, which was wonderful and was very, was set in a high school. Like there was so much of that stuff that I felt like we all had similar sensibilities on. Like it's the same with Buffy, right? Where it's like they're dealing with these day-to-day things that every teenager deals with, and then there's also this other element, and I love that. That's maybe also what I like about Spider-Man, like I mentioned earlier, where he's dealing with all this day-to-day stuff, and then he's also dealing with being a superhero. That's the stuff that I really love, and I love that Lupe's story is so contained. I have a friend who's big into comics. He always loves the big, like, the world is ending, the universe is exploding, we need to save all that stuff. And I love that hers is a very personal, small story, and it was always intended to be. And I feel like that's very relatable, and we can really put ourselves in those shoes of like, yeah, I have a similar situation, and also wouldn't it be cool if I had superpowers? That was something I loved about, honestly, about like Lois and Clark and stuff like that, where it's like he uses his heat vision to warm up his coffee. How great would that be? That's as fun as like stopping moving a planet, like that's more what I think about in the day to day. Is like, sure, would be cool to clean up my room very quickly, and then you get an example of that. So that's all stuff that I really love. And then yeah, we had with hand it over to you, Kit, because we had some great discussions about, the villain and sort of like what we thematically wanted to explore. And, that was all stuff that was really fun. And this came from conversations about like, what do we like? What do we want to explore? What are we interested in? And so much credit to Kit too, of like really bringing in this idea of like white male toxicity, and exploring that, and sort of like what is the opposite of Lupe, like what is the bad version of Peter Parker. Like there was just a lot of great conversations that came from in early conversations, that led to, I think, some of that world building. And then as always happens, some stuff falls away, some stuff stays, but it was um, really, I think, just like what we felt passionate about and what we felt was authentic, putting all of our identities together and really coming up with something that we felt personal and authentic about. I'll hand it to you, Kid, if you have something.
Oh gosh, no, I think I think the your answer was had breadth, it had depth, it had it all. I'm happy to answer another
I
question.
did it.
I'll just point out that some of what Sebastian is referring to in terms of Lupe's supervillain is revealed later in the book, so you should go and read more about it to check it out.
Oh,
Yeah.
spoilers.
I guess
Spoilers.
the one thing I'll say in like a not spoiler way about that is I think to Sebastian's point about wanting to keep everything intimate and personal, the the antagonist of this story is someone she does know quite well, and is like removing the genre as metaphor of it all just is like, if there were no superpowers involved, as a person she would have a huge problem with in real life, who, these people would knock heads in real life, because they are two young people who see the world very, very differently, and kind of and trigger each other and push each other's buttons in ways that are upsetting for both. And that's superpowers aside. So you put superpowers in that mix, and it becomes exponentially more combustible. But I think that's and I say this with a lot of respect and deference to the comic, the superhero shoulders we stand on. But I just wasn't interested in her um, dealing with like a 50-year-old billionaire. You know what I mean? Or like a alien from another planet. Like I really wanted to her antagonist to be someone who she has, yeah, just like a real, like a history with, a intimate relationship with. And I'm really, it honestly is one of the joys of working on this book, was working on that relationship. I think Sebastian and Emma and I both really loved it. Anyway, that's my piece on that. It's quasi spoilery, but not hopefully not too bad.
No,
Can I add one more thing to that,
please.
Liz? So I think too, like the everything that Kit was getting at, and these are, I think that's also what makes it really accessible, and that's what really grounds it. And I'm so happy that Emma, who's not with us today, she's alive, but she's just not here today.
Last time I
Um,
checked, she was there.
she her art style too, like she did not come from superhero comics, which was great, which was perfect for this book. And so I think there's not a lot of like with the big two, where there'd be these big sort of cliche superhero poses and shots and stuff. It all feels very day in the life. Like it all feels very grounded and beautiful and stunning. But I think that was something that I really appreciated, was that, again, it goes back to shared sensibilities between all of us on the team, of just like this really feeling like that could be you, that could be your friend. Like it all just, to me, all of that speaks to that same thing of like just making it accessible and universal.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I remember when you first approached, and Emma's my sister. I'm the elder by a handful of years. And when Sebastian approached us about this, I remember it being so important to you, Sebastian, that not only that this had a female perspective and was so, that was so embodied, but that it really came from people that had been teen girls. And Em and I are both like, we still are teen girls. Like, what are you talking about? Like, been, past tense. You're like, it's like I reached down like half an inch and I bring it all back up. So, but yeah, yeah, it's a real joy to bring a lot of things that, I mean, yeah, to both um, dance with tropes that are but beloved tropes. I think familiar tropes, sometimes it feels a little bit like, ugh, like well trod territory, and that's true. But like also, I don't know, everybody goes to see a dance movie and they get real excited for like the big competition at the end, or we love a makeover sequence, like we love like a car chase. Like tropes aren't just familiar, they're beloved. And so I think there's something exciting for us about doing a superhero training montage and getting into tropes that like aren't like trailer moments, are exciting for people, and at the same time getting to throw a whole bunch on top of those tropes that with hope at the time, and with hope still feel um fresh and timely and exciting.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much. We are getting close to the end of time. So, our last question will be, are there any new projects you guys are working on that you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, no, a couple. Nothing in the world of comics, sadly, but I just produced a pilot for FX, which is the first episode of a television show, and they'll be deciding this summer if they're going to make more. But it's very very cool. It's been announced in the trades, but essentially it's called The Answers, and the very short version of it is, if you imagine The Bachelor by way of Black Mirror. It's a corporation trying to hack romantic love with an experiment that goes off the rails very quickly. So that's also genres, metaphor, and a blast. And I'm doing a couple of things for Hulu and Stars that I really love that are well on their way as well. So a lot of TV stuff that I'm very excited about.
Um, yeah, I have several things that I'm working on. I kind of like Kit said, not really in the comic book space right now, although I'm anxious to get back to that. I love comics, but they're just very time consuming. and uh, but yeah, in the film and TV world, I have some stuff that I'm working on. One thing that's a multi-generational story about a family of curanderas. I have a feature that I'm working on that's in this coming of age space. It's not exactly a superhero story, but it's adjacent, I guess, to that genre. It's in that realm. Oh, I will say I did do a comic book. There's a movie coming out called Black Demon, and I had done a tie-in comic book to that called also Black Demon. And there's a bunch of other. It's continuing as an anthology. I'm not doing the anthology, but there's a lot of great creators that are involved. So I'll shout that out. It's Black Demon Tales, and it's out in comic book shops now. But yeah, I guess that's it. I think there's always, always stuff that we're kicking around.
And Emma's not here, but I do want to shout out because she's the only one currently publishing books, but between all three of us. So Emma went on from just illustrating this to writing and illustrating her graphic novels. She's the author and illustrator of The OK Witch, which is a duology published by, I believe, Simon and Schuster or one of their imprints. It's like one mega publishing house right now. It's like Simon Random, Penguin, whatever. Anyway, no, it's Simon and Schuster. But and then she's got the first book of, I believe it's a trilogy. It's called Knell of Gumbling, and it comes out this September. So OK Witch book 1 and book 2 already out, and Knell of Gumbling comes out this fall. And if you or your patrons are into things like Quince, it's so on brand. It's so like exactly what you should hand them next. It very much I think speaks to the needs of that kind of reader. So
thank you so much. We are definitely looking forward to all of those new projects. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really enjoyable conversation, and everyone loved your rendition of the dramatic reading for your comic, and super excited to read more if they haven't already. Thank you so much for joining us, Sebastian. Thank you, Kit.
Thank you.
And for our audience, if you haven't registered for our audience discussion, that will be starting shortly. There is a link in the chat for you to register and join for a half-hour Zoom session where we'll just be getting together and nerding out together and chat about different favorite media, film, comics, games, super or not. So we will see everyone shortly. Thank you again.